Yeah, that seems about right. Everyone's good except Yurion. Yeah, that's definitely Fire Emblem Heroes for me. Alright, what's up guys? Welcome to a long time, probably in the making type of video. Here we are with some, I'd say brand new, but maybe old school content for a lot of you guys here on the channel. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put together a tier list of what I think is the kind of like the best F2P, I want to say F2P, or low investment, low resource kind of investments you should consider as either a new player or someone who just needs some direction, maybe just thinking of a brand new project. So what I've done is I've kind of combined 11 units. There are more than this, obviously. The gacha can totally throw different things at you. 11 units which I think you should probably consider investing in for one mode or another. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to compile this into the kind of grand scheme of things. So I'm going to rank these units based on what I feel is them covering the most amount of modes, kind of like a general tier list. Don't try to like assume unit performance, for example. Like I can tell you right away that a unit like Bowie isn't gonna magically win his matchups against any of this unit. This isn't like a combat tier list. This is more about a usability investment tier list in which you can kind of progress your own game to get further in Fire Emblem Heroes. So with that being said, I'm gonna rank them alphabetically, so there's no bias. As you can see, Astrum is first, and the last one is Yurion. Let's pull up some fancy images. Criteria blackboard over there. And Astrum's our first guy. So to reiterate, this is what I'm going to rank these units by. Basically, how many modes are they usable in? Of course, any unit is usable technically in every mode, but some units do a better job or historically have proven to give you better results. And yeah, you could probably max invest any of these units and all of a sudden they become really good, but we're trying to keep things on a budget level, especially from an F2P perspective, which I can definitely relate to and share with you guys. Flexible unit and strategies. So I actually don't have supports in this list at all. For example, male Corin would be really good. But what I'm assuming is carry units. You know, carry units you should invest in at least to carry you in some mode or another. And if they are able to then later on maybe take on a support role, then they'll get some bonus points. Low cost for investment. So how much do you actually need to invest for the unit to be usable as a carry? This is an important point because a lot of fodder can be extremely premium and are difficult to obtain, or you just need to basically get so many things before you can actually use the unit. That's a strong point to consider as well. And of course, future-proof or timelessness. This is hard to predict, which is why I feel like it's the lowest of considerations for this list, but it is still important. For example, some of these units have already shown that they have lived the test of time, and therefore I'm going to rank them accordingly on that and assume that they will still be pretty good in years to come just based on either their kit or some other dynamics they may have. I'll explain it, of course, in individual detail. So with that being said, let's start with Astrum. Now, Astrum, believe it or not, I feel is an actual niche, whatever pronunciation you want to use, pick for this list, but I had to put him here because a lot of people see 175 BST, and you know they see a Grail unit who still hasn't been rerun as of this video being released, and they probably think, hey, it must be a good unit, lots of stats, good weapon, and such. But realistically speaking, there are so many Red Sword infantries, and even like a 5-star exclusive that you pull from a gacha will kind of overshadow him. So believe it or not, I'm actually going to put him at a solid C, because I feel like the only place you'll realistically use him in is Arena in the long term. He scores decently, not the most, especially with other Grail options like Flame Emperor now existing, and maybe in the future we'll likely get even more units which will outclass him, at least for arena scoring, Coliseum scoring. His usability in Aether Raids, for example, is, I feel, quite limited. And when it comes to like PvE content, you gotta pretty much use him with like support, distant counter if you want him to carry. His support options are decent. I mean, he buffs at the beginning of turn without having to use rallies and such, but good team comp creation with tactics or link skills still kind of overshadow him. So we kind of start at the bottom here with Astrum, and realistically, arena scoring is as much credit as I'm going to give this guy. Moving on, we have Aversa, and if you guys have followed any of my videos or Twitch content, you'll know right away I'm a big fan of Aversa. Aversa still has a fairly unique tome weapon that is usable in almost all content. Because, well, if you don't know, basically Aversa panics units that are adjacent or and debuffs them. Minor debuffs, like a mini chill of all stats. So that's still extremely powerful in today's game, both PvE content, except really abyssal level kind of stuff, where you can do something else. And definitely Aether Raids, where people still tend to use, sometimes they tend to use buffs on defense teams. Better teams don't, but maybe a mid-level team will still use buffs, and you'll be glad you have Aversa as an option there. Now, Aversa doesn't require max investment. I'm going to put her straight up at S. Even if you missed her initial run, she's still very usable at low investment, using stuff like HP 5 skills, her preference tome, and you're good to go. Low merges, you'll have a great support in Aether Raids. Now, on top of that, even without Aether Raids, she's actually still very good in other modes. In Coliseum modes, if you decide to invest into her more using our dual flying, which would be kind of like higher investment for sure, or PvE content, you can use stuff like blade builds in PvE content, because she has a stat spread for it, using hone flyers, link skills, tactics and such. She can do it. She's not the best option for it, but being a flyer gives her mobility, and that's really good. Coliseum modes, you have guidance and panic and debuff support, so still super strong in that. With Aether Raids, low merges, Aversa definitely gets the job done, and definitely at the very minimum, most people should at least have a +1 Aversa, just in case, in a lot of different content, but Aether Raids especially. I've even considered at times to literally use a second +1 Aversa along with a +10 just to have covered in like both seasons. As time has gone on, she's kind of gotten a little bit less effective because of stuff like chills, sudden panics, sabotage. Yurion, you can see at the end there, are just kind of examples of other units that get the job done. Combining Sudden Panic with a Dancer almost kind of replaces Aversa, but she's still super strong, good stat line, very highly recommended, and I feel like she still will work probably in years to come, unless they literally just bring out a unit who has a better weapon than her, and I don't really see that. So, Aversa, good stuff. Next up is Bike. So Bike is given for free nowadays if you complete the path, and he's also fairly common amongst even older players because you may have picked him up from a Hero Fest or just like his initial debuts and all the other golden eras we've had in which Bike happened. Now Bike seems, I would say he's like a trap kind of investment, because you got to realize he's a 5-star exclusive given for free, so he's actually kind of difficult to merge up. Probably one of the easier ones to do so because of Hero Fest and tickets and such, and he keeps getting rerun and popularity and whatnot. But despite that, he kind of wants stats from merges to really see his peak. He also wants an IV, most notably probably plus speed or plus attack, depending on the build you choose. And to carry, this is where things get rough. You kind of want stuff like Lancina or Maelcorin behind also supporting, and to properly use him, especially in something like Aether Raids, he needs that support to also be almost equally merged up so they can soak chills. Soaking chills meaning having higher stats than Bike, so if chills exist on the enemy team, they take that debuff instead of him. So you got like so many variables going for Bike. And this applies to most tanks, but with Bike it's kind of more relevant because Bike has some strict hard counters, and because most people expect to see Bike hitting their Aether Raids maps, for example, they're going to have the counters in place to beat him, like hardy bearing fast units. He'll get doubled through his weapon, die, you don't have merges, you don't have no follow-up, specific investments, distant counter, like all that, and Bike tends to fall off unless you hard max investment. Now if you hard max investment, he's still really good in PvE. He can be used in Coliseum modes. He scores decently, like the same level as Versa, but because he doesn't have any sort of support capabilities and he's really not ranged in anything, he's literally forced into a very specific, narrow way where he can definitely get countered and fall off in usability. As soon as they release skills that may just literally say, hey, damage reduction doesn't work, or everyone starts getting hardy bearing weapons, the arrow of Bike falls apart. So I'm going to give him a solid B for Bike, because that's where he needs to be. Alright, now some of you may be shocked to see Bowie on this list. And I put him here, and I haven't put some other characters that maybe I'm definitely going to hear from in the comments below. But Bowie he's here because he is kind of unique in what you get from the pool. Now, being green, he's going to show up more often than you might think, and at low merges, he will do an okay job. But the thing is, he's got like a conditional close counter tome, which means you don't need close counter, which is a very, I would say, pretty difficult fodder to pick up besides the free one you pick up from Takumi. It's not actually found on that many units. Like one legendary has it, one 5-star exclusive that's been removed from the new pool has it, and a couple seasonals. Like that's pretty much it what we got, and it's kind of something you want to keep for someone that you really want to invest in from max. So Bowie's a good low cost investment because of his kind of not having a close counter tome, you can kind of give him A skills, which you may have just randomly picked up. For example, and even if we get later, Grand Hero Battles, Tempest Trials units with this sort of fodder, Bowie will be a little bit better in that regard too. I'm talking like solo skills, bonus doubler even, and all these have counterplay, but they are, much more common than something like close counter. So you pick up whatever A skill, fort defense, res, distant defense 4, stance 4, even all these like things, you may have one or another. And you're good to go. You even pick up, if you really go budget, steady posture too from like Thea, it might be even good enough. So Bowie, as a new player, if I was a new player, I'd probably build a Bowie, use him like a couple low merges and work as a decent tank. Because with Mythics, his stats go up. With some support like Maelcorn, his stats are really easy to soak because he's really low across the board, but he shines because he can use an A skill which doesn't increase his visible stats, makes him pretty good. So Bowie as like a little baby tank starting out, I'd say he's actually pretty good. Hitting magical, having a Raven Tome, don't forget, makes this guy really stand out. Even at high investment, he gets a bit better, though I wouldn't really recommend him all the way up to S, especially for Ether raids. Bowie's pretty good. Maybe some mid-level PvE content would be good. Feel like he does fall apart a little bit in Coliseum because you really need a G duel skill, but having close counter and a G duel is kind of nice to have as well. So B, Bowie, solid in the middle. That's where I'll put him. Now, in contrast, next up we have Rania. Now a Grail unit, Tempest Trials. Unfortunately, Grails will get eaten up if you invest into something like Rania. However, Rania, again, kind of wants to act as a tank, and I feel like she will get better as time goes on because a lot of strategies do depend on debuffs, and she doesn't care about those. So both on attacking on offense or defense, super strong. Coliseum modes, having a range unit lets you manipulate AI. Good gameplay will let you accomplish that. Rania is a unit that will stand the test of time. Panic Manor HP threshold's gone up, who cares? Tactics Room, who cares? Well, it does. It kind of bothers you to play, but at least it doesn't affect her stats and such. So the biggest problem with Rania is the fact that she's blue, but she gets so much stats, especially properly supported, that she doesn't really care. So Rania, kind of like a comparison to Bowie, I would say would just be like strictly a better Bowie. This is a unit capable of running close counter or even any A skills and trying to snipe melee and then tanking strictly range. Works really well. Can work as a PvE unit too with the right build, using stuff like special spirals, life and deaths if you really wanted to go that way and go hard on Rania. But really the one thing holding her back is just I don't feel she's that great in Coliseum modes, but everywhere else she's really good. Ether raids, definitely super strong there. So A for Ether raids. Rania, super strong there. Now next up, fairly newly released Flame Emperor. Believe it or not, with Flame Emperor, again, another sort of trap, kind of like with Astrum, where you see a unit with a lot of stats. And realistically, we've had this type of unit for a long time. It's called Halloween Dorcas. The difference is that Halloween Dorcas is a Tempest Trials unit, costs more grails, and has a little bit less stats. So what do stats mean? Stats mean higher scoring in Colosseum. So C for Colosseum, because Flame Emperor should strictly be used in a Colosseum mode to give you that extra boost in score. Now, when it comes to everything else, though, I am not on board with this, because as time passes, they will give us stronger and stronger units in terms of stats, where Flame Emperor eventually will lose value, kind of like Halloween Dorcas for once. And honestly, investment needs to be really high. You got to really give the skills, like top level skills for scoring. Strategies can be as good as strategies come when it comes to armors, which is like using any of the fighter skills and hoping for like a hammer. I mean, you're not getting too much out of that. I really don't think there's much you can do with armors. Armors are very restrictive because of their movement, reliance on guidance, or march from other teammates. Speaking of march, if you run march on Emperor, it doesn't work, because to max score, you need to give a 300 SPC skill, which march is not. So as you can see, we're running into all these restrictions, which something like Flame Emperor doesn't do. Strictly Colosseum unit, not recommended for PV or Ether raids in any way. Armors have way too many problems in those modes to be good units. Colosseum unit though, solid investment, pretty low cost other than just the fodder you need, which will be the one thing setting you back. Probably the best unit when it comes to Colosseum scoring, but in terms of performance, alright. And to keep up the three houses trend, we got Crona next. Now, Crona is a very, I'd say, love-hate relationship with me in terms of how I've kind of deemed this unit. Believe it or not, I actually feel like Crona has aged well and will continue to age well, and seems to have good usability in everything except Colosseum modes. Now, the thing is, as maybe a new player, you could technically use her in a Colosseum mode, and she could do a lot of work there, but that's really her one and only weakness as a character in terms of usability in all modes, which means that in everything else, she's amazing. So yeah, like PvE content, you run a special spiral build on her, you run a desperation build, whatever, you're gonna sweep stuff. Like, you're gonna sweep it good. Her best partner in PvE is easily Duma, to just make sure her preference weapon is activated, and you're gonna be sweeping all abyssals. As soon as I had a Crona invested, it was a piece of cake to just beat basically all abyssals, and PvE became a complete and utter joke for me. Now, in terms of Ether raids, and this is the one where most people will probably agree, I assume, I hope, Crona is definitely at the top in terms of investment there. So, and the reason I'm going to put Crona so high up is because of her flexibility. She can run literally 3 different builds, which I feel like all have some merit to them, or at least if the meta changes, Crona can adapt to those changes. So what I mean is her HP is high enough that building level ups hurt her less. She can literally run up to 71 HP with triple mythics when you get to that point with a refined dagger, when the best refined dagger is of course Broadleaf Fan. She has high speed, high stats, defense and res. Not the greatest attack, but Broadleaf gives you so much throughput anyways that you'll get that done. So Broadleaf is a strategy you can run on her and enhance her HP up to 66 or 71 HP to beat those building buffs should the future ask for that in Ether raids. Of course, her preference weapon is unique to her, and that still gives her, again, choice and strategy. Choice and strategy being, you know what, people are countering Crona with or countering Broadleaf using stuff like maybe Rania on defense, or new units who may act like Rania. Fine. Preference weapon on her, Athame, using Hector, Halloween Hector. If you pick him up, Bolt Tower strategies, Savage Blows, Dancers, and boom, there you go. We cut down the HP of the enemy, and Crona is able to sweep her way with Vantage, which otherwise a Broadleaf user may not be able to. It's something that just gives her flexibility. And of course, I don't see this being the greatest, but you could technically run a tank build on Crona as well, because she has higher stats than other daggers in this particular role. Probably not using her preference weapon, probably something else, but that flexibility is super awesome. Honestly, One of the best things you can invest in as a new player. Low merges works fine. You don't even need to plus 10 Crona because honestly, Colosseum is pretty much the only mode that would demand that. I've kept her at plus 9, giving her the final attack stat. But as a new player, even if you miss out on Crona's initial runs and reruns or any events that may happen, low merges works fine because gameplay and strategy will overcome those sort of things. So Crona up here at the top, no doubt about it. Now, we were talking about Broadleaf, and Broadleaf is a seasonal weapon, so of course I'm going to talk about Matthew, who happens to be the F2P equivalent of that. Matthew's actually given for free as a new player, so you don't even have to suffer through gacha to pick him up. You do technically get close counter, and all you really need to work towards is literally Divine Dew and Advantage from somewhere, and he's good to go. So he's like literally the entry point for investments into getting into Ether Raids to run a Vantage strategy, and you should run a Vantage strategy. So picking between like Crona and Matthew should be like one of the first things you do. With that being said though, Matthew is interesting because as a broadleaf user, he's probably one of the weakest to do it. Now, it does give you so much stats, a broadleaf weapon, like in terms of attack to get kills, and he has low attack, so it doesn't really matter because you get so much throughput. But what does matter is honestly, his weapon has some drawbacks, namely that it buffs him, so he has some weakness to panic. His high defense and buffing and res might be a setback if you want to bait dancers in your Vantage strategy, and sometimes that at low attack does come to bite you in the butt. Plus, him being gacha means if you did truly want to merge him up, you don't always have that choice, or may not want to pull colorless. His usability in other modes is like weaker than Crona comparatively, and even to other daggers not so great. So, he kind of falls behind in terms of long-term abilities, and I'd probably put him just a solid B because if more units like Rania existed, Matthew completely falls off and a lot of Broadleaf falls off. So, kind of B. Just gonna put him right there and say good entry point for strategy. Not really the greatest in terms of investing hard into him. Probably going to carry tons of matches for you though to get your climb up though. So he's got to be right there as an entry point. Similar to Bowie, at least in this regard. No real usability in Colosseum and not that great for PvE from my point of view. Now, how do you have a low investment list without somebody like Reinhardt? Of course. And he has lived the test of time up till from like 2017. He truly is good. Now, the thing is, Reinhardt is very good in PvE content, almost unusable in Colosseum because he scores so low. And finally, Ether Raids. Now, Ether Raids is definitely something where Reinhardt may seem like he should be the top, but it isn't exactly that. Most people will consider Reinhardt just as they would consider Bike as a threat on either defenses or even offenses for people running him because he's so common and he's given for free. Plus, you'll see him tons once you do dip into that gacha. So, Reinhardt, unfortunately, is limited in how you use him. You can use him as hit and run on offense, but he'll struggle against green units, and that will set him back. On defense, his best place is a cav line, but there are even strategies which he can be used in without cav lines. So both of those strategies are still usable in Ether Raids. Colosseum complete dud, which definitely holds him back from being top of this list of an investment. And honestly, for the memes is as far as you get here. PvE, Triple Dancer Reinhardt, still technically a strategy for most content in the game. If you have nothing else to work with, it's always at least given a try, especially if there's no high green res units. I still think he'll live the test of time because having a brave weapon with 5 effective range with movement included makes him super strong, and some skills like Lull, which just made him better, along with an ARD skill if you run a cav line, puts him right there as a prominent threat, always to be considered. Moving on, I added Ross in here as being, again, kind of like a high scoring unit, being 175, tons of stats, and the one thing that definitely will set him back though will be the fact that you have to get 11 copies of him from the gacha to use him. Now that's going to be the hardest thing to obtain if you were to use him in Colosseums. However, compared to Astrum and compared to Flame Emperor, I actually believe he is usable in the other modes much better. Now, Astrum suffers being low res and kind of dependent on either his preference weapon or using a refinable weapon, which isn't too great. Red isn't the most ideal low res unit to use in Ether 8s. However, Ross, in contrast, has low res, but is green, and that is much better. Now, should there be units which are prominent red units that are a threat, keyword a threat, on defense, then he'll lose his viability. I do feel like he's much better than Astrum and Flame Emperor because he can be used on Ether raids, whether that's defense or offense, and the green axe options are pretty good. So you got your Woe Dows, you got your Woe Gun. Woe Done is the comparison for the sword users. You got your slaying axes. You know, you got really high attack on Ross, IV choice compared to Astrum, who wouldn't have it. So if you wanted to run plus res, he'll have that advantage. And green beating the most threatening defense units that you'll see. So Ophelia, Reinhardt, of course, come to mind. Thrasier, at least being green means you are in an equal matchup. And realistically, his biggest threats are probably Sothis and Lif, but both have counterplay because they're melee, and you can definitely play around them as opposed to trying to just utter face tank that you would through range units. Ross is also capable of running stuff like Gale Force builds, and honestly, this is why you could use him in Colosseum or Ether Raids, depending on how you do it. Frontlining as Ether Raids is also an option, but again, most of this is mostly just coming down to the fact that he'd be usable in most modes, and at least way more usable than something like Astrum. You might even ask, why is he above Bike? And again, that mostly just comes down to merges and the fact that a 3-star like Ross you'll eventually get plenty of copies of, whereas Bike you really wouldn't, without having to spend or waiting for the particular banners of that being the case. Pulling green, you're likely to see Rosses. Pulling green, you have to look for Bike and spend tons of orbs there. So that's the biggest difference. Ross is kind of like an afterthought project that you could make. If honestly, he's definitely at the lowest of A, somewhere at, I would say, like the top of B. So he would be here or here. He's maybe not as good as something like Rania or Reinhardt when it comes to investment, but he's something to consider, especially when it comes to scoring in Colosseum and usability in other modes. And finally, Yurion. Oh man. Alright. Wow. Okay. Yurion is probably, again, one of the better units to use as a new player or just kind of having direction, because he can run the close counter Vantage or even a close counter tank build that some of these units here might do. But the thing is, he has future usability even when you're done with his role. For example, Bike, Matthew, Bowie, once they've kind of been overshadowed by newer projects or just stuff that you've played or used more, Yurion doesn't just lose his value as soon as he's done carrying for you. He actually becomes a support unit, similar to how Aversa functions. So Aversa can carry, but then she can also support. Yurion does kind of the same thing because he has sudden panic built into his weapon. The only drawback is, of course, it doesn't have the mini chills, which Aversa has. Yurion does have more HP though, and that is definitely really nice. But with that being said, he's not really the greatest of stat spreads. So in terms of his carry potential, it's there because once you factor in the health check, it's about 36 or so with the right IVs. Pretty good, but res is something of question, and yeah, he's gonna have his problems, but being colorless at least means you have fairly good matchups across the board. Biggest thing going for him is definitely usability. Definitely the usability as a carry initially as like a new account or first units that you may invest into, and then later subbing into a support role. I don't think he's as great as Aversa, but he's basically an alternative to Aversa if you don't want to use Grails or you didn't pick her up in her initial runs. So yeah, if you ever see a sort of meta that may have lots of flyers, someone like Yurion's going to get a lot better, but Other than that, you know, as even a Coliseum unit, you're gonna have to get tons of copies from the gacha. You start off with 1 for free, 2 from like the free units, so you can potentially start with a +2, which can get a lot of work done. I think he'd be better than Matthew, let's say, as an initial strategy, but then subbing into a support role. Where with Matthew, you carry initially, get high enough where he gets overshadowed by other potential investments. Yurion, sub to the support role instead, or invest highly into Coliseum for a sudden panic roll similar to a Versa. Of course, C-dual infantry will be your drawback there from truly working. Okay guys, well, with that being said, this is how my F2P investment looks like. List. There are some honorable mentions which I haven't put into this list, but you can definitely consider or talk about in the future. Even in the comments below, if you guys have other ideas, I can definitely make more similar kind of lists like this in the future. Maybe a premium one-off investment list. I'm thinking of doing that as well. So Winter Cecilia, definitely a notable mention that I wanted to bring in here. Echidna is pretty much the same thing as Ross here, but harder to pick up. Norn is also kind of similar, doesn't require like a C-dual infantry skill, can definitely be used if you happen to get that many copies. And yeah, I'd say that's pretty good on what I would definitely think about as investments. There's definitely more units that can be talked about, but these guys will at least do what they need to and give you tons of time to do that. Hey guys, thank you for watching. As always, it helps a lot if you give the video a like below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and comment below about what you would think, how you would add or change anything here. Remember, this is just my thoughts based on my experience of playing the game at a high level for such a long time. Join the Discord, check out the Twitch channel. See you guys in the next one. Much love. Peace.